As we kick off a new series this weekend called Reboot. New series this weekend called Reboot, and we'll be zooming in on Nehemiah chapter number 1. We'll get there in a moment. I thought it was appropriate for us to go in this direction following our opening series, just simply because of where we are in our world right now, our personal world, our city, our community, our global world. All of us somehow, some way are in some form of rebooting. Like we're trying to figure out this new kind of situation that we're in, kind of maybe, hopefully, kind of, sort of coming out of a pandemic, and all of the shifts that we have experienced. When we think about rebooting or to reboot, we typically think about that with an operating system within a computer. And it just simply means to restart and refresh. And if you have an Apple product, the little pinwheel gets to turn in and you need to figure that out. Or if you got some other device that you use, it starts getting bogged down. So you need to restart it and reboot it. Something has happened to just kind of slow it down. And so no doubt our world has definitely been slowed down in several ways. Businesses and organizations are rebooting. They're using the term pivoting, which means they're shifting their model and their strategy as a result of what's been happening around us. And we know what's been happening. It's been this pandemic thing that just seems to just keep lingering and won't go away. Our rhythms are different or have shifted. There's been a huge housing migration. Droves of people are resigning from jobs or shifting jobs. Many have lost jobs. And then we've also lost lives. We've lost loved ones. And so for some of us, it's not a reboot. It's a complete rebuild where we are right now. And I've been thinking about this in a variety of different ways, and I've been bothered as well, as I'm sure some of you all have been bothered, because what we have also experienced is seeing how there's an increase in the degradation of humanity around us, seemingly, or the curtain has been pulled back to reveal the hearts of where we really are and where people really are. Issues have become more important than individuals. Policies have been more about power than the people they're supposed to support. Grace has been seen as giving in, which is not what grace is. And we've been shaming people if they don't believe or think the same way that we think. Now, none of this is new, of course. It's just more pronounced because of what we've been in. And over the last 18, 19, 20 months, just stuff has just been seemingly crashing around us. And the reactions have been all over the map. Now, maybe in the long run, some of these things will be good, and I think they will be. But here's what I do know. Somehow, some way, we all got to reboot. We got to figure this reboot thing out. And so the question for us is this. What, where, and how do we start? What's the game plan? Well, I'm so glad you asked. You guys are so studious and always asking great questions. Thank you. Nehemiah, I think, gives us a blueprint for how to do this. And some of you may be familiar with Nehemiah's story, but this story about Nehemiah in the Old Testament has fascinated me for years. The situation is desperate, is dire. The people of Israel are very vulnerable at this point. And no, they weren't experiencing a pandemic or coming out of a pandemic like us. It may have been worse in a lot of instances, but the specific situation is their city has been devastated and the city walls have been destroyed. Now, that might not mean much to you, but in ancient times, when the city walls were destroyed, that meant that you were completely vulnerable from outside attack. That meant that your life really couldn't go on like you would want it to, because you're just so worried about possibly being attacked. And so your regular life would have been interrupted. Now, we know what that's like. You know, should we gather? Should we not gather? Should we wear masks? Should we not wear masks? Should we vaccinate? Should we not vaccinate? Oh, man, we can go to the stadiums now. It's 25, 50,000 people, masks, no mask. I mean, all of this stuff we're trying to figure out. What's safe, what's not safe. In Israel, just the progression of Israel, they've gone from a family, when we track in the Old Testament, they've gone from a family, Abraham's family, to a nation who were being oppressed in Egypt. They grew into a nation, then into a kingdom, then the kingdom got divided, and then they were scattered as remnants. And this is where we pick up the story now, where they've been exiled, and they're returning back to Jerusalem. Now, this guy Nehemiah, he's Jewish, but he lives in a foreign country. He lives in a Persian, under a Persian kingdom, which is modern-day Iran, and he works for a king named Artaxerxes. And Nehemiah's job is he's a cupbearer. Now, that might not seem like much to you, but that meant that he was a trusted advisor to the king, because basically he was the king's taste tester. He had to make sure the food was good, you know, there wasn't any poison in it. And I mean, I guess, you know, like, I don't know if it's a great job, because if you eat the food and it's poison, then, you know, you die. Like, well, that's not good. But Nehemiah got a good government job, y'all. He got a good government job. Like, his house, you know, is in the palace with the king. He got all this stuff taken care of. So he in a good spot. But he gets word about what's happening to his people. And guess what? He's in a good enough spot. He's in a place of privilege, all right? So he doesn't have to respond a certain way. He don't have to leave. He could send money. Like, he could, you know, he could just say, oh, my God, I feel so bad. Well, you know, what can I do? And then not do anything. Like, I mean, he's living life in a great way right now. And we figure out later what he does, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But how do we proceed when our community, when our city, when our personal lives, when our world around us is not well? There's discomfort, there's distress, there's disaster. And that's what I want to zoom in on and unpack for us today. And I think Nehemiah shows us exactly how to do this. So let's pick up in verse number 4. When I heard these words, I sat down and wept. I mourned for a number of days, fasting and praying before the God of the heavens. I said, Lord, the God of the heavens, the great and awe-inspiring God who keeps his gracious covenant with those who love him and keep his commands, let your eyes be open and your ears be attentive to hear your servant's prayer, that I now pray to you day and night for your servants, the Israelites. I confess the sins we have committed against you. Both I and my father's family have sinned. We have acted corruptly toward you and have not kept the commands, statutes, and ordinances you gave your servant Moses. Please remember what you commanded your servant Moses. If you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the peoples. But if you return to me and carefully observe my commands, even though your exiles were banished to the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place where I chose and have my name dwell. They are your servants and your people. You redeemed them by your great power and strong hand. Please, Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to that of your servants who delight to revere your name. Give your servant success today and grant him compassion in the presence of this man. I want to just tag this message this weekend with the title, Pause Before You Plan. Pause before you plan, because Nehemiah gets this just word that is devastating, and obviously there's a reaction in him, but he shows us or gives us a blueprint for what to do, which is pausing before we plan. So many times we don't know exactly what to do when the you-know-what hits the fan in our lives, or circumstances around us are falling apart, and it calls for some sort of response. Nehemiah doesn't know what to do either. But right off of the bat, we see three things that Nehemiah did in verse number 4. And this is before I get to my points, but it's important for us to elevate. And it's all under this umbrella of pausing. So Nehemiah, it says that he wept. I'm going to use the word lamented. He fasted and he prayed. He lamented, he fasted, and he prayed. And this is so significant because it speaks to the spiritual maturity of Nehemiah. Because, see, we don't really know where we are until certain stuff hits our lives. We don't know how much patience we have until it's tested. We don't know how loving we are until we're confronted with evil. We don't know the where we are with the fruits of the Spirit that are outlined in our lives until stuff hits our lives. And so this craziness hits Nehemiah's life, and it shows us his level of maturity. The truth be told is when stuff like this hits our lives, we tend to think about our own capacity and what we can do and who we're going to call, how we're going to make this happen, how we're going to adjust this situation. Nehemiah, I'm sure, has several reactions, but what he did beforehand is critical. It says that he prayed, but before he did that, he lamented and he fasted. And here's the significance of that. The lamenting piece is about allowing ourselves to feel, allowing ourselves to process and take in what is happening. And sometimes these things should provoke or invoke in us some level of lamenting, even if it's not like actual tears, but brokenness within us. And then it says that he fasted. This idea of fasting draws us near to God because we say, God, of all of the things that I could consume right now, what I need to consume most is you. What I need is to be in line and attuned to you. That's what I need most. And so this is what Nehemiah does. When we think back to this idea of lamenting, what lamenting also does is it draws in our heart and it helps us to feel and it activates our empathy. And what we need more in the world today is empathy, all right, that then flows into our execution. So what if we were executing out of empathy as opposed to sympathy? Sympathy says, I feel bad for. Empathy says, I feel bad with. And oftentimes, it's much easier to have sympathy because it don't involve me stepping in. But empathy involves stepping into it and actually feeling it. And sometimes that's just a little bit too much for us. But there is a lamenting tradition within the church throughout history. And there's also a recent tradition of lamenting, specifically in the black church, when there's oppression and we are feeling this oppression, and all we can do is cry out to God and say, God, help us. And all we have is our unity to be with one another. Jesus said there's a blessing for those who mourn. Paul says there's an obligation to mourn with those who mourn. And get this, how much more would our impact in the world be if we had empathetic execution versus sympathetic solutions? So the sympathetic solution is, hey, brother, I'll give you $1 or I'll kind of minimally, just help you out. But empathetic is, no, I'm actually processing this with you, feeling it. I'm going to walk with you no matter how long it takes, no matter how far it will take me. I'm going to step into this. See, that's a little bit too much. We love staying on the periphery. But this is not what Nehemiah does. Again, I just want to highlight this again. Nehemiah got a good government job, y'all. He got benefits, everything is good. I mean, he's completely removed from this situation. He doesn't have to go anywhere and do anything. But he laments and then he fasts And I'm going to just be perfectly honest and transparent. Fasting is a spiritual tradition and a discipline that I need to be more attuned to. I need to give myself more to that. I'm confessing that right now. Because Jesus said in the New Testament, hey, listen, disciples, the reason why you couldn't do certain things because you got to fast and pray. So some of that is as a result of you having to commit yourself to fasting. Again, fasting helps us to gain clarity, and it's putting our sole attention on hearing from God. But often the pace of our world and the demand of the pulls force us to just kind of have this pseudo time with God. These quick, moments of, God, will you help me? Like I got this situation. No. Fasting shifts your whole being and perspective on God. And it helps us to create margin so that we can be clear and hear from God. So Nehemiah, he laments, he fasts, and then I want to get to the critical part here, which is it says he prayed. And I want us to examine his prayer because I think there's a blueprint even in the prayer. And there are three things that I want to highlight in terms of how he prayed. All right. So number one, it says that Nehemiah confessed the sins of Israel and his own. So he confessed. Listen to this. This was a collective confession. He said, God, listen, I know that Israel has not done the things that they should have been doing. And I know I have sinned. I know my family has sinned. And so, God, will you just have mercy on us? And I want to acknowledge the fact that we have had a part to play in this. What if in the world that we lived in and the society and the culture that if we just came and say, we all have sinned. We all have participated. We all have been complicit in the divide that we see. As opposed to drawing the divide and picking sides and pointing the finger at, it's much easier to do that than to implicate yourself. But this is not what Nehemiah does. When we're thinking about rebuilding and rebooting in this season, what do we need to confess before we move on? Personally, collectively, what do we need to confess? I think this is a tradition that our Catholic brothers and sisters have really gotten right, the confession piece and the practice of confession. It is a healthy thing. And listen, confession is a part of lamenting. It's this idea that Nehemiah said, we are all in this together. Now, again, Nehemiah is removed from this. He wasn't the cause of what happened here. He didn't make it. It wasn't him, but he has said, hey, listen, I'm in this with you, even though he's not physically there at this moment. There's a biblical precedent for confession as a rebuilding block. Nehemiah is lamenting and confessing the sins of those before him and his own. And part of the reason why we continue to have the cultural divide that we have is because we're unwilling to confess our own sins. We're unwilling to confess or at least put ourselves out there to say, hey, how might I have contributed to where might my ignorance be in this? And instead, we criticize with people when these things are brought up, and we say, "Oh, well, why are we still talking about that? Why are we still bringing these things up? Why are these things still being discussed and talked about?" Confession and lamenting is a big part of how you move forward. And as a matter of fact, if you went to counseling or you saw a therapist, they're not going to say, "Oh, listen, don't just worry about that in the past. We're moving forward." No, they understand that we got to talk about what happened before so that we can move forward in a healthy way. We would never tell a victim who's experienced trauma, we would never tell, "Oh, why are you still talking about that? Why are you still bringing that up?" We would never say that because it's a healthy part of healing. Confession. We need a practice of confession. Then it says that Nehemiah, and I love this part, it says he reminded God of his commandments and his promises. And this is important because what Nehemiah is doing, he's praying God's word back to him. That's what he's saying. And listen, nothing convicts me more than when my kids say, Dad, you said, especially when I might have forgotten what I said. No, you can't have, no, but Dad, you said. It's like, ooh, man, did I say that? I did say that. So Nehemiah is echoing Leviticus 6 back to God, where God is basically saying, I'm going to do all of these things if you don't go in the right direction. But if you return to me, I will restore. And so what Nehemiah is saying is, God, listen, I know you said these things, but you said if we return to you, so give us the opportunity to return so you can restore. So when we're praying and we're in conversation with God, it's important to know what God has said and what promises he's offered to us so that we can remind him of his promises. Not that he forgot, but he will respond to what we remind him of. So he confesses, he reminds God of his commandments, and then thirdly, he asks God for compassion. And this is important because Nehemiah not once is asking for God to bless his agenda. He asked God for compassion, and he didn't present any agenda, any plans. It isn't recorded anywhere that he shared any ideas or brought up any strategy. He just generally asked for general success and compassion. And the reason why is because Nehemiah wanted God's heart and his will. And sometimes, again, we want God's will, but maybe not his heart, because we don't know what that might require of us. But he wanted God specifically to go before him, and his actions demonstrated that. Just as a teaser, because we're going to continue in this story next week. What Nehemiah senses is that he knows he's got to go before the king. And so he's asking God to go before him before he has this conversation. Now, maybe we don't know what we have to do. Maybe that's not clear for us, but asking God to go before us is a good idea. To give us insight, to give us clarity on what we should do, and to give us favor, which is ultimately what Nehemiah is asking. Too many times we already have an agenda, we already have a plan, we already have an idea. God, this is what we need to do, just bless this. Right here. No. I already know. This right here. This is it. God, listen, I know. Listen, this is the plan right here. I figured it out already. I've been crying about it. I've asked my friend about it. I Googled it. Like, this is the plan right here. No, Nehemiah doesn't do that. He says, God, give me compassion. Give me favor and success before this man. Let me land the plane like this and let us be on our way. There's no doubt that wherever we are, whatever our situation is, some better than others, that we are in a rebooting moment. You know, speaking of, it's been mentioned several times to me. And it's not that encouraging, but I understand why people have said it. Man, you launched a church in a pandemic. You are crazy. You know why that is said? Because everybody's rebooting. Everybody's trying to figure it out. The normal metrics of what you do when you do what we're doing, they're not in play right now. They're not. Because everything has shifted. But listen, we're not following a normal game plan. We're not following the strategy of the culture. We're not following we're following what God has called us to do. And so when we're rebooting and we're rebuilding or we're doing something new, sometimes we have to just push all of these things to the side that might not make sense, that might not be conventional, and seek what God will have for us to do. And what it requires is us to pause before we plan. We got to pause. And it's so easy to just start putting plans together. If you're anything like me, in my top 5 in Strength Finders, if you're familiar with that, is activator. Those are the people who are ready to go right now. When I wake up in the morning, I'm ready to go. My wife will tell you, I'm a morning person. When I get up, when my feet hit the floor, I'm ready to go now. So this is a challenge for me to pause and really seek God for direction and clarity, but to also do what Nehemiah did, to allow myself to feel, to lament, and to process emotionally, and allow my empathy to grow in the way that it needs to go, and to fast. God, give me clarity. Show me which way to go, what to do, how to do it. How do I lead this church? How do I lead this mission? How do I do this at the tail end of this pandemic, or whatever the case may be? How do we do this? Here's also what I found. I found that when the pause is missing, we're short-sighted on our execution. We just miss stuff because we didn't pause. I also realized too that sometimes we're real heavy on the prayer part. Some of us got the prayer part down. We just gonna pray and pray and pray because that's keeping us from acting. We just gonna get on our knees and just wait until the Lord. That's cool, but we also need to be acting as well. And the pausing in the prayer is not to keep us paused, but to inform our action. And I love the motto of the AND campaign that talks about how we can be exemplify grace and truth. It says that we need prayer and action. We need both. The prayer just needs to precede the action. And let me just close with this. Prayer is the process that gets us ready beforehand, and it activates the source. The source is God. So the prayer part and the pausing part gets us ready beforehand, and it activates God, the source. Instead of us acting upon our own resources, which are limited because they came from a source, and thinking that is going to carry us. Most of the focus on this story, which we'll touch on in the next couple of weeks, is Nehemiah actually leaving the comfort of where he was and rebuilding a city wall in 52 days. Record time. Listen, we're not talking about tractors. We're not talking about modern equipment. We're not talking about bulldozers. Like rebuilding a wall with man labor in 52 days. But you know what preceded that? Several days of lamenting, fasting, and praying. When you do the math, it ended up being 4 months of Nehemiah pausing to seek what God would have for him to do for 4 months. He didn't go before the king for 4 months. So what if we did that? There are approximately 42 days left in 2021 before we get to 2022. What if we just said, you know what? I'm going to act upon this right now in my life. I'm going to take a pause as we come to the end of the year. We're trying, because this is not the end of a normal year. We're the end of a normal 2-year period. We're coming into another year. And what do we need to do to reboot? Maybe the time for us to pause is right now as we come into the end of this year. And what if this pause allowed us to get aligned with God's intentions in our lives?